Top 3 Scariest School Horror Stories That Will Chill You to the Bone. Story 1. The Hallway That Never Ends. You shouldn't have clicked on this video. You shouldn't be listening. But here you are, drawn in by something that's calling to you, an irresistible pull. Just know, once you hear this, you can never go back. It was supposed to be an ordinary day at school, but for Kyle, it became a living nightmare. The school was old, but not that old, built decades ago, but it still had all the quirks of a typical public institution. That is, until one evening when the school was empty and Kyle stayed late, finishing some homework in the library. Around 6 p.m., when everyone else had already left, Kyle decided to take a quick shortcut down a hallway he'd never noticed before. It was hidden at the back of the school, behind an old janitor's closet. His curiosity got the better of him. What harm could there be? As Kyle stepped into the hallway, the first thing he noticed was how silent it was. The air was heavier, thicker than anywhere else in the school. The walls seemed to close in as he walked, the floor creaking with each step as though it hadn't been used in decades. He turned a corner and then he saw it. The hallway stretched on, too long, too impossibly long. There was no way the school was this big. There was no end in sight. The dim light flickered overhead, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. Kyle felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. And then he heard it, the sound of footsteps behind him, light but deliberate. It was someone following him. He turned around. No one. His heart raced. He began walking faster, but the hallway stretched even further, the shadows stretching to unnatural lengths. The footsteps kept getting closer, echoing behind him. Panic surged. His breath quickened. He sprinted, and the hallway stretched further, the lights flickering wildly. And then he realized it. He wasn't running down the hallway. The hallway was running with him. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He could hear whispers now, voices that weren't his own, whispering his name. Kyle's pulse thundered in his ears. He was trapped. Every time he turned, every time he tried to run, the hallway stretched on. And then it happened, he stopped hearing the footsteps. But the whispers didn't stop. They surrounded him, and in a moment of sheer terror, the lights above went out completely. It was pitch black. And in that silence, Kyle felt something watching him. Something that wasn't human. Something that had always been there, waiting. He tried to scream, but his mouth couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. And then the whisper stopped. The school was silent. Kyle was gone. Story 2. The Ghost in the Gymnasium. Rachel was a skeptic. She never believed in ghosts, not in the way the others did. So when her friends dared her to go alone into the old gymnasium at night, she took it as a challenge. The gym had always been unsettling, its high ceilings, the faint smell of sweat and old wood, but she didn't believe it was haunted. That night, Rachel entered the gym with nothing but her phone and a sense of bravado. The door creaked as she stepped inside. The air was musty, the faint light of the streetlights outside casting long shadows across the wooden floors. Rachel laughed at her own fear, dismissing it. Just a building, just an old gym, nothing to be afraid of. Then she heard it, the sound of footsteps. She froze. She wasn't alone. Rachel spun around, her breath shallow, heart pounding. She couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps were unmistakable. They weren't coming from outside the gym, not from the halls or the bleachers. They were coming from the court, the sound of slow, heavy footfalls as though someone was pacing. "Hello?" Rachel called out, her voice shaky. No answer. The footsteps grew louder, faster, as though the person was closing in on her. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind her. She tried to pull at the handle. Nothing. Her phone, once brightly lit, flickered out of existence in her hands. And then the laughter began. It was quiet at first, low and breathy, like someone who had been holding back a laugh for far too long. It came from above, from the rafters of the gym, before dropping down around her. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to shift, move. The laughter grew louder, more mocking, filling every corner of the gym. And then eyes. Hundreds of eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, all staring at Rachel. No one was there, but the eyes were real. They were watching. And then, in the silence that followed, a figure appeared from the shadows. A figure that was not human. It had no face, just a dark void staring at Rachel, and it reached toward her with long, twisted arms. Rachel tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The laughter echoed as the figure took her. Story 3. The Shadow in the Classroom. The last story takes place in a high school, one that had long been abandoned. Its students and faculty moved out years ago due to a strange, mysterious fire that was never fully explained. It was said that the fire had taken something, someone, and no one ever spoke of it. But for Jamie, a school history enthusiast, this was exactly the place to explore. He entered the building late one evening, flashlight in hand. The floors were covered in dust. The walls, once vibrant with murals, were now cracked and peeling. The classrooms, long forgotten, were empty, except for the blackboard at the front of each room. The writing on the boards was too perfect, too fresh, as if someone had just written there moments ago. But no one had. Jamie moved through the halls, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. In one room, the air turned cold, freezing him in place. As he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him. He turned to face the chalkboard. And there, written in pristine white chalk, was a message. "I am watching you." Jamie spun around. No one was there. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. The shadow in the corner of the room, moving slowly, impossibly. It had no form, no face, no shape, just a darkness that didn't belong. It crept closer, its long fingers reaching toward Jamie. In terror, Jamie tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He felt the air grow thick, suffocating as the shadow crawled toward him, enveloping him in its cold embrace. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the words, now written in blood across the chalkboard. "You will never leave. If you've made it this far, you're not just a listener, you're part of this nightmare. You've invited something into your life. Something is watching you. Do you dare to know more? Subscribe now and stay connected, because this nightmare isn't over.